just talking informally before we opened the doors that actually it's a year yesterday since we launched the first research report on the review of the youth work sector's response to the Covid-19 pandemic. And little did we think that 12 months later that we would be doing a sequel to it. But as we said, perhaps it's just as well that we all didn't know what's in front of us. So I'm absolutely delighted to have the guests with us here today. We are joined by Minister Roderick O'Gorman, by Deborah Irwin and Lorraine Thompson, who are the researchers and who actually did phase 1 of this research. And we also have an input from a very special young person. So we're looking forward to that. If you have any comments or questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the session. I need to say at the outset that the Minister is under pressure today and is going to be with us for the first half hour of the session. So we're going to move straight into that, if that is okay. So I'm going to hand over to Deborah Irwin and Lorraine Thompson. Lorraine and Deborah are professionally qualified youth work practitioners with almost 40 years combined experience of youth work and youth service management under their belt, primarily in the community and voluntary sector. And having previously worked in a range of youth work settings, they both chose to set out on new career directions in March 2015. And whilst individually they have developed successful freelance portfolios, they've also formed a very solid working partnership, delivering a range of strategic review processes and research work together. And they have a very impressive list of organisations that they previously worked for and with. So I'm going to hand over directly to Deborah and Lorraine.
Thanks, Mary. I'm just going to share the presentation. I'm Lorraine Thompson, and thank you for letting us share what we found during the research. Before we get into the presentation, we would just like to say a huge thank you to everyone who has participated in this research, whether it was through completing a survey or participating in a focus group or interview. We really did appreciate your input, which provided such a wealth of insight into the review. We are particularly grateful to all the young people who took part, particularly at a time whenever being on a Zoom call was probably the last thing they wanted to do. So we really do appreciate everyone's input. The methodology that we undertook involved both qualitative and quantitative methods. The desk research examined reports and articles looking at the impact of the pandemic on youth work, and we also reviewed NYCI online check-in sessions with youth workers. We distributed 3 surveys. The Young People Survey attracted 70 valid responses, and the Youth Worker and Volunteer one attracted 240 responses, of which 129 paid. There were 129 paid staff and 111 volunteers. And then we had 54 valid responses to the Managers Survey. We conducted 12 semi-structured interviews with stakeholders, and we facilitated 2 youth worker focus groups, 1 focus group with volunteers, and then we did 5 young people's focus groups, and 4 of these were online and 1 was in person. So moving on to the findings then, firstly, we'll have a wee look at the youth work sector's response to the pandemic. In relation to maintaining a service, the combined data from the surveys with the managers and with youth workers and volunteers showed that 32% were able to maintain a service, 63% continued, but with a reduced service, and only 5% discontinued their service. Through the survey, we asked managers to provide 2019-20 pre-COVID figures and then figures for 2020-21, the first year of the pandemic, so that we could get a comparison between the 2 years. In relation to the number of groups, clubs and units, 30% of organisations maintained the same level and 9% saw an increase. But there was a significant decrease in service provision for 24 organisations, where there was an overall 62% reduction. So that was a loss of just over 1,000 groups, clubs and units. And 92% of respondents attributed the decrease to the pandemic. Then in relation to volunteer levels, 61% saw a decrease in volunteer involvement during the first year of the pandemic. Overall, there was a 64% reduction, representing a loss of over 7,000 volunteers. And a significant majority of these organisations, 85%, attributed this to the pandemic. Then looking at levels of engagement with young people, only 7% of organisations maintained the same level of engagement by young people. 11% increased their engagement, which equated to an extra 3,655 young people. However, a substantial 69% experienced a decrease in the numbers of young people engaging with their services. And this equated to a 50% reduction, with more than 80,000 less young people engaged in comparison with pre-pandemic figures. And 83% attributed this to the pandemic. One of the key characteristics of the sector's response has been adaptability. The sector has worked creatively and collaboratively to continue to offer young people a service. It has focused on building capacity of staff and volunteers and developed internal policies and adapted to address logistical challenges, safeguarding and practices to comply with COVID restrictions. It has continued to meet the needs of young people using a young person-centred approach. Young people themselves have been appreciative of their youth leaders' efforts and think they have gone above and beyond to keep them connected and check in with them. But not all organisations had the same starting point, and for some, their infrastructure, work practices and financial position, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, posed challenges to moving online. And even more recently, there have been difficulties moving to in-person provision with restrictions on space and numbers.
So question 2 of the research focused on methodologies that youth organisations were using. 90% of survey respondents were using video conferencing for group engagement, and this was followed quite closely by 78% using text messaging. And then there were substantial proportions of the respondents delivering activity packs to young people, delivering outdoors youth work, providing one-to-one phone or video contact, and facilitating group work outside. And you can see the percentages there, 58, 56, 53, and 50% respectively. So we found that youth organisations facilitated a wide range of online activities, everything from competitions and quizzes and podcasting and campaign work, to scavenger hunts and e-learning opportunities. We noticed that many of the responses reflected various forms of outdoor youth work, so things like walk and talks, outdoor boot camps, outdoor learning activities, and so on. And then organisations also did a variety of community engagement initiatives that were broadly intergenerational or encouraged local social action. Things like youth groups painting public benches in their area or making and sending cards to older isolated people in their community. And another common trend in the responses was delivering different kinds of online well-being focused programs or check-ins that provided mindfulness, meditation, or resilience sessions. We've cited more examples in the full report, and it's by no means comprehensive of all that was happening, but you really get a sense of the creativity and innovation displayed by youth workers and by young people. The young people who participated in the research were broadly very positive about their experience of what youth organisations offered. There was one young person speaking about their youth workers felt that the restrictions never stopped them from staying in contact with us. They never seemed to take the excuse of groups are impossible like some could have. And that was a view that was shared. In the survey, we asked about the limitations experienced by youth workers, volunteers and managers in delivering youth work during the pandemic. And the top 3 selections were young people not having adequate digital access at 72%, young people who are reluctant to engage digitally, 71%, and difficulty engaging with young people who are at risk or marginalised at 50%. What came through the interviews and focus groups, it was interesting that there was a broad consensus that content-based thematic programs with a clear remit and purpose can work well online. But by contrast, informal engagement was considered more difficult to replicate online, partly because young people would far rather spend time with their friends in person. And it was also then noted that ad hoc and in-person interactions are vital for rapport building and meaningful support.
The third question looked at support of staff and volunteers in terms of their well-being and their capacity. The pandemic has had a range of impacts on staff and volunteers affecting their personal well-being and their capacity to carry out their roles. While many youth workers want to remain optimistic, there was this time around, I felt a sense of exhaustion and burnout among the youth workers involved in the research, which was attributed to the overall stress caused by the longevity. Just as Mary was talking about the longevity of the pandemic, who would have thought we'd be here now? And the concern to meet young people's needs, and particularly those who have disengaged. The lack of in-person contact with colleagues has had a significant effect, causing isolation. And there is a belief that there will be youth workers and volunteers who will leave the sector as a result. However, many organisations have put initiatives in place to support staff and volunteers' well-being. For example, increased communication and supervision, wellness initiatives, and facilitating access to counselling. And you can read more examples in the full report. They've also supported staff to build capacity through training, improved digital infrastructure, and preparation for returning to in-person provision. There were some gaps identified, and the most common issue raised was the need for more frequent and clearer communication.
So the fourth key area of the research was about identifying the supports needed to mitigate the impact of the ongoing pandemic. One of the key points was around the essential nature of youth work and the need to facilitate in-person engagement, particularly because youth services are seen as a vital source of support for so many young people. The other key point was the need for adequate resourcing for the sector, and in several specific areas, including addressing areas of fallout. For example, we heard about increased safeguarding referrals and increased risk-taking behaviours among young people, adding pressures on voluntary services to meet the demand. And then some interviewees noted the importance of adapting to young people's emerging needs as we come out of the pandemic. And there were concerns about the challenges of re-engaging young people, indicating a need for some support with the return to in-person provision. Volunteer recruitment, training and support was another significant area seen as requiring investment. And then continuing professional development and networking, ensuring that there are opportunities for support and practice development, and attending to staff and volunteer well-being. So in conclusion, and our recommendations based on the research, 4 clear priority areas emerged for the youth sector going forward. There was concern about wider structural challenges and how they are felt in the lived experiences of young people. So advocacy for young people is vital, as well as a commitment to young person-centered practice. Then there's a need for advocacy for the sector, and in 3 key areas. Firstly, working towards systems of funding that encourage strategic thinking, offer sustainability, and serve the needs of young people. Many welcomed the formal state recognition of youth work as an essential service in March last year, and the feedback indicates a need to understand that essential nature, as not only when it's about crisis intervention, but also when it's about supporting young people's mental health, facilitating outreach, particularly with young people who are at risk, and offering universal services or open access youth work. And then ensuring the visibility of youth work is also key in order to promote young people and youth activities, to communicate what youth work is and the benefits to the individual and to society at large. So there are a couple of examples in the report where different sectors and agencies partnered very effectively in ways that benefited young people and their communities during the pandemic. And that kind of strategic collaboration can really strengthen practice and serve young people. And finally, workforce development and support is a very important area going forward. That's about building in a multi-layered approach to support, providing adequate and meaningful supervision for staff and volunteers, fostering professional connections and learning exchange, and addressing isolation. Overall, this study shows that the youth sector can be proud of its track record in its handling of the pandemic. Youth workers made invaluable contributions to the lives of the young people and their families across Ireland, and proved the essential nature of youth services going into the future. And both Lorraine and I were humbled time and again by the youth workers and volunteers and managers that we spoke to in the research. And we were proud to be associated with youth work because incredible work was happening, incredible dedication to young people. And so it was a privilege to be part of this research and to get an overview of what the work was like during the pandemic. Thanks for your time, and we'll be happy to respond to some questions.
Thank you very much, Deborah and Lorraine. It's very encouraging, I think, you know, that we're continuing to hear about the invaluable contribution that youth work is making, you know, to the lives of young people and to communities, but also that there are very, very significant challenges ahead. And I suppose in relation to particular cohorts of young people, those challenges existed pre-COVID. And I think it's shone a light on them, that those you know, structural inequalities that exist in society, whilst we were all in the same pandemic, actually people were better equipped. Some people were better equipped than others. And it's interesting what you're saying in relation to you know, how you felt where people were at, and we're also finding that in terms of our interaction with our member organisations. And I remember at the very early stage in the first phase of the pandemic, one of the CEOs of our member organisation saying, we've embraced this as though it's a sprint, but actually it's a marathon. And little did we know just how long of a marathon you know it actually was going to be. And I do get a sense that I'm not a marathon runner, but those who are talk about hitting the wall. And I do think there is a sense of where youth workers, youth organisations potentially have hit the wall. And obviously you need support and encouragement and to be enabled, you know, to get around that. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Mia. We have a short video from Mia, who is involved with Blakestown and Mindview Youth Initiative. Mia Maloney is 16 years old. She has a younger brother and a sister, and she's in her leaving cert year. So has had a challenging couple of years, I would think, with COVID. And her favourite subjects are home economics and religion. When Mia finishes school, she wants to continue her education and is interested in courses that are related to criminology or psychology. She hopes to join the Guards when she's finished college. Her favourite hobby is to bake, and she loves to bake and make cakes, muffins and cookies for herself and others. It really helps her feel relaxed, and I think especially in this, her leaving cert year. and we know how much people enjoyed baking. It helped everyone relax, I think, during the pandemic. So I'm going to hand over to Mia.
NYCI is a place that young people can go to get support. It's a space where I can go and know that I am listened to, where I know that my voice, my opinions and what I feel are valued. It's important to me to know that I am listened to, and NYCI encourages me to talk about my feelings, what I am not certain about and what I want to do to be the best version of myself. I know that I can always go to NYCI and get guidance on what's really good for me. I can also look at myself and see how I can impact my own life, my family and my community. In NYCI, I can think, make better decisions and be myself. It's a safe place to be, and it's a place to help me really think about where I am at and where I want to be at. The biggest impact for me was the lack of physical interaction. NYCI kept in contact through phone calls, text messages and Zoom, and all the social media platforms like Instagram. I knew as well that I could ring or text anytime I wanted to. I still didn't feel as comfortable as being there, and I still didn't find it as easy to talk to. And no matter how great technology is at the moment, I think there's a huge difference in being in NYCI and being on the phone or online. I even missed the journey going to NYCI. The walk, looking forward to the atmosphere, knowing I had some place to go was really important. Some place where I truly felt listened to and supported. That was the big impact for me. Technology can't replace the feeling of really being with people. It's the exact same for my friends and family, talking online, through Zoom and other stuff, but it's just not the same. I felt a real frustration having no control, not being able to see my friends, not being able to see my family. I share a room and I felt like my privacy was affected, and a lot of people, I felt like I was on my own, even with all the support. Because physically I was reminded all the time of being separated from people. It was on the news all the time, not to be with people, to be alone. Like I said earlier, a lot of people were getting frustrated, and because of that, people fall out over silly little things. It was hard to study and hard to focus on education, hard to see a way out. It's times like that that you really need support. So when NYCI returned properly, when I could go back in, I felt energised. I had a focus, a purpose, somewhere to go again, somewhere where I felt valued and part of something. And my confidence started to come back. My friends and family started to come back, and everything feels like it's starting to get much better. I am glad to have my friends and family back. I'm glad to be back in NYCI.
Thank you very much, Mia. And I think Mia just summed it up beautifully when she said, you know, technology can't replace the feeling of being with people. And sure, we're experiencing that today, and how much more acutely was that felt by young people in that position where it was hard to see a way out, where everything is pointing towards you actually not being with people when that's the very thing that you wanted to be. And it was good to hear that youth work was supporting Mia through that. So we really appreciate Mia's input. I want to hand over now to Minister Roderick O'Gorman. Minister O'Gorman is the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, and he was appointed to this role in June 2020. Prior to that, he was elected to represent the Dublin West constituency in the 2020 general election. And before that, he was elected to Dáil Éireann. He served on Fingal County Council, having been first elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2019, representing the Green Party. An EU law lecturer, he has worked with the DCU Brexit Institute, focusing on how to manage the challenge facing Ireland as a result of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. And he has also served on the boards of management of 5 schools, and I suppose has had something of a baptism of fire coming into office in the middle of a global pandemic. I'd like to hand over to you now, Minister.
Thanks, Mary. Can you see and hear me all right there?
Can indeed.
That's great. Listen, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And look, I really want to thank the National Youth Council of Ireland for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to thank Deborah and Lorraine for their research and for the presentation they gave to us. I'd also like to thank Mia for her, I suppose, explaining to us her experience of the lockdown. I know BMYI have been there a number of times over the years. It's in my own constituency. I haven't been there since I became minister because obviously it's been shut down almost the entire time. So I'm looking forward to getting the opportunity to go out and visit it soon and recognise the great work that the team there continue to do during COVID. And I want to thank everyone who's contributed to the publication of today's report, the 2021 review of the youth work sector's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's clear that this research has involved a huge amount of hard work, and it highlights the dedication and the determination of youth workers and indeed the young people who were involved in drawing together this research. And I think the publication of this research is particularly timely as we continue to unwind the COVID restrictions, as our schools and our colleges return to normal, and as we look forward to the 22nd of October and hopefully seeing the end of many of the remaining restrictions. And I really welcome this report because I think it provides a really valuable insight into the issues that affected the provision of youth work and highlights how the youth sector has adapted and how it has actually responded to those challenges over the last 18 months. And those 18 months have been really difficult for so many people. We've lost loved ones, we've missed shared moments, we've missed some of those really, really important milestones, particularly in the lives of young people. And I think, you know, the Debs, the celebrations after the Leaving Cert, all of those moments are so important. And young people, they were away from their schools, they were separated from their friends, and they faced a set of challenges. And it's a set of challenges that me, my generation, and so many of the rest of us on this call who are older, that we never faced in our youth, in our teenage years, or in our times in school. I think it is really important to emphasize that young people did so much and did the country such service during the crisis we've undergone. And I know young people were unfairly maligned in certain sections of the media, but by and large, they abided by restrictions, they got on with their education, they kept in touch with their friends and family. And I think young people should be immensely proud of themselves for how they worked with everybody else to get us through the pandemic. And I think the youth sector played an absolutely pivotal role in mitigating the impact of COVID on the lives of young people. And I think it's always been the case that our young people should be supported and their potential and their contributions should be recognised and fostered. But now that's more critical than ever. And I've regularly spoken about the particular impact that the pandemic and the associated public health restrictions have on young people and the importance of supporting them both during the crisis, but also in the period we are now in, beyond the crisis. And in 2020, my department commissioned a piece of research to hear from young people directly about their experiences with COVID-19 and particularly how it impacted on their well-being. And that was with a view to informing youth services and indeed how the rest of government responded and could best respond to the needs of young people. And the results of that survey, which was entitled "How's Your Head? Youth Voices During COVID-19, underlined the experiences that many young people had of isolation, of boredom, of anxiety, of loss of income, and other difficulties. And young people, you know, like the rest of us, they missed family and friends. They felt lonely. They felt isolated. They didn't enjoy the lack of routine. There was an impact on their education, on their ability to get jobs and as such get money, and also on their ability to access services as well. And we also found that young people that engaged in youth work or youth clubs or youth groups, they tended to be more optimistic and more excited about their future. And I think that was a really important insight that came out of that research. And therefore, to ensure ensure the ongoing work and availability of youth work during the pandemic, my department has worked very closely with youth services to ensure that young people, especially those who are vulnerable, continue to receive necessary supports to the greatest degree that we could. So services continue to be delivered outdoors or remotely, and where necessary, those with strict public health guidance through outreach or detached work, through small group work, and indeed through crisis intervention work. And to support the delivery of necessary face-to-face supports to young people who are vulnerable, at risk, or in crisis, youth services delivery has been explicitly recognised as an essential service under the COVID regulations. And I've continued to review and approve the sector-specific guidance for youth work organisations, which have been developed by my department in collaboration with key youth sector representatives. And the guidance has been updated in line with the changes to the public health guidance. And it's great to see the increasing return to indoor youth activities that followed the publication of COVID-19 Reframing the Challenge. And by the 22nd of October, the majority of restrictions on youth activities will be removed, and that will be gratefully welcomed by both young people and by the sector as a whole. And in recognition of that really vital role that youth work and youth services play in providing support to young people, I secured increased funding for the youth sector during the current challenging period. And this enabled the youth sector to continue to provide the supports for young people, particularly to marginalised, disadvantaged, or vulnerable groups. And in the budget 2021, I was able to secure an increase of €5 million in funding, and that brought the overall budget for the provision of youth services to 66.8 million. And this funding is supporting frontline services as they seek to continue to innovate and provide crucial services for young people. And again, in recognition of the particular challenges that the youth sector faced, I approved a set of small grants for youth clubs and services as some contribution towards the cost of mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 restrictions. I furthermore committed to ensuring that the voice of young people is heard and given due weight in the decision-making across government. My department progresses these aims through the implementation of actions from the National Strategy on Children and Young People's Participation in Decision-Making, the establishment of the National Participation Office, the recent publication of the National Framework for Children and Young People's Participation in Decision-Making, and a renewed and strengthened commitment to Comhairle na nÓg, which is the permanent structure for the inclusion of young people in decision-making at local and at national level. And as we look to emerge from the shadow of COVID-19, young people have a key role in shaping Ireland's future after the pandemic. And in many cases, they are driving the changes that they want to see. And it's really important that we support them in doing that. And I'm continually struck by the resilience of our nation's young people. And, you know, talking back to the How's Your Head survey I spoke about earlier on, I've always been struck by the words that one person used in their response to that survey. And that person said, "We're all in the pandemic together and we will come out of it together." And I think that is, I suppose, a strong message for all of us as we look forward to the final removal of so many of the public health restrictions from the 22nd of October. So look, again, really appreciate the opportunity to speak here, really appreciate the important research that's being done, that helps me, helps my department, helps government shape our responses and shape our support for the sector. And just, you know, once again, and I don't think I can say this too much, I want to recognise the amazing work that this sector has done over the last 18 months, both the paid youth officers, the volunteers, and the young people as well. Thanks very much, Mary.
Thank you very much, Minister. We really appreciate those words, and we also want to acknowledge actually that the department was very quick out of the traps to reassure the sector in relation to funding, which was greatly appreciated, and also very quick out of the traps in relation to the provision of guidance at a very early stage. And of course, they worked very closely with the sector in ensuring that those that guidance was fit for purpose. And you will be aware, because it's reported back, around how diligent actually the sector has been in terms of their adherence to that guidance, making sure that youth work is safe for young people, for volunteers and staff. And I know that you're not in a position to say anything, obviously, with Budget 2022 looming, but you can see that whilst there's been wonderful innovative work, it is a stark picture, you know, in terms of what the research was showing, where you've 80,000 less young people who are actively engaged. There's a loss of 1,000 clubs, which is the universal service that you know is what most young people up and down the country are used to participating in their local community, and obviously the loss of 7,000 volunteers, you know, as a minimum. So the sector isn't starting back, you know, from the same place that it was in before the pandemic, and obviously there'll be a need for, you know, additional resources to for the sector to recover, you know, to renew, to build back confidence. I think what we're finding is that the sector in some ways is in transition, you know, that there's an anxiety, and because of their diligence in adhering to guidance, there is an anxiety around keeping volunteer staff and especially young people safe. So we know that you will do your very best to ensure that youth work will continue, not just to survive, but to thrive in the years ahead, because as young people themselves say, it's such an important factor in terms of building their resilience and supporting them to return to whatever normal life looks like. So just before I hand over to Dufasa, there are just a couple of comments in the we're talking about strategic collaboration addressing the needs of younger members of the service to better meet their play needs, and about how great an impact that had during the summer. Someone was asking, and perhaps Deborah and Lorraine can respond to that, was the research carried out both north and south of the border? And also then someone's asking about thoughts on effectively advocating for the status and value of youth work. So good to hear that. There's also a couple of other questions to Deborah and to Lorraine, which kind of follows on from what's been said there. What can youth organisations do to advocate effectively for young people and youth work?
Yeah, so I can take that one, Mary. Yeah, like I think there were some good examples shared, like in the full report, oh, hang on, sorry, just getting my video on the go here. It was a disembodied look there for a moment. Yeah, like I think sharing young people's stories and supporting young people to share their own stories is really important. You know, so stories like what we've just heard from Mia, I think is vital. And you know, getting the word out in local newspapers about youth activities, and it might be even, you know, simple things like building a relationship with a local journalist to ensure that, you know, youth activities or events or initiatives can get covered. Obviously, it's unfortunately bad news seems to sell more newspapers, but I think there is an interest when you know, young people are involved in, you know, particularly in community initiatives that can really profile what youth work is and what's going on. Joint initiatives, I think, are really important between different local organisations, youth organisations, where they can get together and draw like more young people together from different groups. I think that's really important. And I think there's something about trying to push against funding systems that sometimes can make us more competitive in the sector, and trying to find ways in which we can you know, work together, that collaboration piece, and think about how we can be collective, and particularly in terms of kind of challenging some of the negative perceptions about young people. I think that's something that youth organisations can do together, and ultimately I think it's about working with young people to support them to advocate for themselves and their peers. They're more than capable, and figuring out what matters to them and helping them to address the challenges that they can kind of see around them. So like, I'm not saying anything new here, because a lot of this was happening and there was evidence of this in the research, but I think all of those things are good things to do. It's worth spending the time on, and it's hard because we get so busy doing the work, but I think we have to kind of carve out somehow the opportunities to do that communications kind of piece, and figure out ways in which we can put our resources with other organisations and other groups.
Yeah, and I think there's some really good examples of where that has been done, and certainly I've heard from our own member organisations where either they're working more closely with their counterparts in other parts of the island, or indeed in Scotland, England and Wales, in terms of sharing resources, where people are sharing ideas. And in relation to NYCI and our Youth Work Changes Lives campaign, where organisations came together at local level to engage young people and kind of broker contact with local public representatives. So I think there are some very good examples of that. One of the other questions then was that, based on the findings, what are the actions that youth organisations should consider in order to support the well-being of staff and volunteers?
I'll maybe take that one. So, I mean, we did allude to some of the stuff that has been happening. I suppose just to re-acknowledge, we talk about the resilience of young people, and we talk about the resilience of youth workers, but that can't be an excuse not to support both young people and our workers and our volunteers. And so they are, as you said, Mary, they started a sprint over a year and a half ago, and they're still going. And I think one of the main things that we can do is give a wee bit of space now. The temptation will be, look, on the 22nd of October, everything's, restrictions have gone, let's get going again, let's do everything that we can. And that's not to say that we postpone providing a service, an in-person service to young people, but we need to build up our staff. And some of the examples were pretty amazing. There were wellbeing days, bringing staff teams up a mountain for a walk because they hadn't had an in-person full staff meeting in over a year. Increasing supervision sessions and maybe offline supervision if that's an option. A lot of people talked about the NYCI check-ins, how good those were just to connect with other people from across the country. But there was a request nearly to say, look, let's stop talking about COVID. Can we just share practice? People are COVIDed out. And so they want to share practice. They want to really support each other in actually serving young people and do fun stuff. Just get some fun stuff going. Another organisation talked about that multi-layer that Deb's talked about there at the end of the presentation. They had actually brought in a psychotherapist and provided both individual and group therapy for their staff team, where they could have the fun stuff, all the other stuff, but they got to that in-depth layer where they were really able to discuss to discuss the impact, but also then what can be done. How can we move forward? How can we keep staff in the profession? And likewise for volunteers, as always, don't ask for much. I think they just want to be thanked. They don't even want to be thanked, but I think if we can actually recognize their value and express that genuinely to them, like, we do appreciate everything that you do for young people, that'll go a very long way.
Yeah. And in relation to the specific question with regard to North-South, do one of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so it was primarily, I suppose, based on getting feedback from organisations in the South. Although, like the 3 surveys went out on the NYCI mailing list, and I know that everybody North and South is getting that. So, or loads of organisations. So it was open to everyone. One of the youth focus groups would have been part of a cross-border youth project. But we were trying to ensure that those that we interviewed and the focus groups were diverse in terms of geographic location and the kind of groups that they were working with. So yeah, kind of, I suppose maybe by default it was primarily focused on the South. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, a number of our member organisations are all island, so you would have picked up with them as well. There's a message in the chat from the Mary Stokes from the National Centre for Guidance and Education, saying congratulations on the report. In our work supporting the development of resources and policy in lifelong guidance practice, so much of your research resonates. Connectivity, collaboration and cooperation is key. And then goes on to say there's significant developments in guidance counselling that would be important to hear about as well, and the guidance framework that has enormous potential. So if there aren't any other questions, I just need to say that the report will be on our website, hopefully more or less as we speak. And we will also follow up by email to all of the delegates who have registered for today's event. So it will be winging its way into either your inbox or your clutter, wherever you get your NYCI emails. And now I'd like to hand over to Dufasa Kelly. Dufasa, in her day job, a very busy day job as Manager of Information and Communications in Scouting Ireland, she's also been a member of NYCI's board for a number of years, and it is her 3rd year of a 3-year term as President of NYCI. So I'd like to hand over to Dufasa. Thank you, Dufasa.
Thank you, Mary. Firstly, thank you all for being here, and a special big thank you to Mia for her contribution today and her honesty, for sharing with us her frustrations and challenges and how she experienced the pandemic and the support that she received at BMYI. And it's wonderful that BMYI and all of the youth sector is opening up and allowing us to meet again in person and supporting all the young people that engage in these groups. I'd like to thank Minister O'Gorman for joining us today and taking the time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule. And what I'd like to say is, yes, he is absolutely right. The work that is done in this sector for and with young people is incredible. The innovation that is always present, not just during COVID, is there. It's always there, but it has been amplified by all of you in the face of the pandemic. The innovation is evidenced in this report, and the value of it is highlighted not only in the report, but also by Mia earlier in describing her impacts, or describing the impact her engagement with Blakestown and Mount View Youth Initiative has had upon her during the past 18 months. I'd like to thank the Minister for his continued support for the sector and the support demonstrated in recognising youth work as a vital service and in the funding that has been provided, and in meeting with us and joining us today as well. I suppose what really is important when it comes to research is, what does that research lead to? What contribution does it make, and what are the actions that we choose to take as a result of the findings and recommendations? Because without this, I suppose with any report, it can sit on a shelf gathering dust. So I suppose as a result of this research that's conducted by Deborah and Lorraine on behalf of NYCI and us, our members, we as a sector and the government get to choose what we do next. So the research has highlighted to us that we must support our workforce. These are our volunteers, our employees, our youth workers, which the sector is absolutely nothing without. And we must support them to deliver the best youth work possible. As we move to come out of this pandemic, they must be supported in their welfare and in their service provision. We must enable them to restore their connection with their communities and support them in restoring their motivation and providing them with continued support to do so. It is fantastic to note the positive feedback on NYCI's check-in sessions, the access to employee assistance programs, and the supervision that has been provided by our members to their employees and their volunteers. However, more is needed, and in particular, more is actually needed for our volunteers. It really is imperative not only to prevent further erosion of our volunteers. I mean, let's just contemplate on that number, that 7,000 less we have at the moment, and we really need to restore those numbers to post-pandemic levels, not just to support the ones that we have now, but to restore that. And how are we going to get there is the question I suppose we all have to think about now as a result of this research. I think what was really striking was that we must continue to collaborate. I mean, we have as a sector been collaborating very, very well. And we know, and we have seen the evidence of this, not only in this report, but in actually the actions that have taken place during this pandemic, that we are stronger together. The NYCI check-ins provided support. It provided a shared space for learning and connection, which was fantastic. And also there's an example in the research where where the oversight group was identified as a really good example of how the youth sector representatives and DEC DIY came together and continues to be a shining example of ensuring that we actually just get it done. This way of working can only contribute to benefit the young people in Ireland. The research also shows us that we must advocate for our youth. We must empower our youth to advocate for themselves and for others. I mean, is this not what youth work is all about? I don't say this lightly, and we hear this all of the time, but like, just sit with it and consider it. Our young people are the future. It is our future and their future, but they are the future. How we support them and those who support them now will impact them, their lives, our communities, their communities, and our society as a whole for decades to come. We must advocate for our young people, for our youth workers and the sector. The impact of the work, the value of those who contribute, its workforce, the volunteers and employees value are not recognized overall. The visibility or the positioning of youth work is key to this. While it is imperative that we drive to increase awareness and understanding of youth work, and as highlighted in the report, that the value of it not just in crisis situations. The importance and impact of universal youth work or youth work for all young people needs to be visible. And again, how we do this is vitally important for the future of the sector. We must hold on to the benefits we have gained through this pandemic in the sector, building on them, but we must more importantly rebuild, restore and strengthen the sector to continue supporting the change. I'd like to thank Deborah and Lorraine for being with us today and giving us such insight into the research. The depth and quality of it is demonstrated here today in your presentation and in the report. The number of survey responses, interviews, the adults and youth participation in the focus groups provides such richness. This strengthens the report and ensures we are capturing the sector right now. Thank you again for your clear, detailed report, and I will encourage all of you to sit with it and read it. I'd like to thank Mary and the team at NYCI, Mary Claire and James in particular, in this case, in their support for ensuring that the research was so well put together and presented here today. The work that all of you at NYCI do to unite and support the sector does not go unnoticed, so thank you all. And finally, I'd like to thank you, our members. The work that is done by all of you is invaluable, and while a lot of it is reflected in this report, it is not the measure of the impact of youth work on our young people in its totality. While this report accounts for youth work today and for the past year, accounting for the positives, the gaps, the potential impact of missed interactions, the reality of burnout on our volunteers and youth workers, it does not and could not account for the impact of the engagement that you and your organisations provide. The impact is truly realised in years to come. As with many who engage with youth work, and I include my own experience, we reflect on the benefit of it from a distance. It can be years before we note the impact it had by compounding positively on our lives as we grow and make choices meeting life's opportunities with skills, experience and resilience learned and developed during our time at that local youth club, arts, environmental, film, guide or scout group. It carries with us through life. And while we reflect on the past year today, which enables us to make evidence-based decisions to develop, innovate and restore our sector, it is stories such as those highlighted through our Youth Work Changes Lives campaign that clearly demonstrates the value of you, our volunteers and our youth workers. The real stories set out the real impact that you continue to make in many, many lives. On occasions, I found myself mixing up the phrase youth work changes lives with youth work saves lives. And I know, I'm sure Daniel and Mary probably give out to me for saying that now, but I don't believe that that is a complete mistake. As for some, youth work does actually save lives. And that is why we must do everything to ensure that the erosion of the provision of youth work that has occurred because of COVID-19 cannot be allowed to continue. It really is striking, those three numbers, the 1,000 groups, the 7,000 volunteers and the 80,000 less young people who are not now benefiting from youth work. That erosion must stop. And this is why it is vital that our Youth Work Changes Lives campaign needs the sector's full backing to drive forward our call for an additional 10 million for the sector to enable us to take action on this research. Please make sure that you add your voice by signing the petition to call on the government for this additional 10 million to provide more supports and activities for young people and meet the needs of a growing youth population that has really been hit hard by the pandemic. So you'll find our petition and supports and this report on our website and social media now, as Mary highlighted. Again, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and please read the report and reflect on what we can do to act on this research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tufasa. I think that's an appropriate point on which to end. There's been very significant work done and obviously significantly more to do. Just before we finish, there's a couple of other comments in the chat box. So Andrew Bell is saying, thanks for an insightful presentation on this report, which will benefit a policy response as government, both North and South, seeks to support the sector and ultimately to meet the needs of our young people. Looking forward to reading the full report. There've also been a couple of comments in terms of what would we like our legacy to be? So people talk about COVID and legacy, and what would the sector like our legacy to be? And perhaps that's something that we can take back into NYCI and discuss further. And then a very practical one from Casey O'Riordan, who's asking, when considering how 80,000 fewer young people engaged with services over the last 12 months, how much do we think that inadequate access to computers and technology contributed to that drop? So I don't know whether Deborah or Lorraine just want to answer that one quickly.
Yeah, I can have a stab at that one. I suppose it's hard to quantify. Like we didn't track that one specifically. Like that was definitely one of the reasons. Like I think it's a mixture of things, and that lack of access, that the digital divide, I suppose, definitely affected young people in rural communities, or young people who were particularly marginalized for whatever reason, perhaps young people in care, or young people in from the traveller community. So yeah, groups who experience marginalization in different ways, I think that would definitely apply. There would also have been, we were hearing about young people who maybe didn't have that private space in the home. Mia kind of hinted at that, that was kind of difficult. And so yeah, that there were kind of a range of factors at play. There was one of the youth workers in the interviews spoke very eloquently just about how some of the more marginalized young people he would have worked with just maybe didn't really have the kind of decision-making kind of capacity to make that proactive engagement online. And that was, he talked about, young people who kind of get out of the way of going to school, and it kind of becomes a habit, and then it just it's maybe hard to kind of re-engage. So I think, yeah, that there needs to be kind of recognition just of those kind of different challenges at play. But so sorry, I can't quantify exactly, but all of those things were at play.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're almost exactly on time, 1 minute over. So hopefully you feel planned and executed with precision. It's a really excellent piece of work that Deborah and Lorraine have done, builds on the work that we did last year. It's really encouraging to hear both from our own minister and from colleagues in Northern Ireland that it will be of value in informing the policy positions as they go forward. So wishing you all the best in the weeks and months ahead as things begin to reopen and we take those tentative steps back towards whatever normality will look like for the future. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.